The morning began like so many others in her small, cluttered apartment. The faint light of dawn pushed through thin curtains, painting the cracked walls with shades of pale gold. An old kettle hissed on the stove, the whistle faint and tired, like it had done the same job too many times. Elena Carter, 34 years old, sat at the worn wooden table, leafing through stacks of graded papers. Red ink circled words, arrows pointed at spelling errors, and little notes of encouragement were scribbled in the margins. She wasn't paid enough to care this much, but she cared anyway. Her paycheck barely stretched to cover rent and utilities. The landlord had left another note taped to her door the night before, a reminder of payment due. She folded it and pushed it under a pile of books, refusing to let it sour her morning. A sip of lukewarm tea steadied her. She glanced at the clock on the wall, its ticking louder than the quiet hum of her refrigerator. Almost 7. She tied her hair into a loose bun, slipped on her modest grey coat, and picked up the stack of papers to carry to school. Outside, the city was waking. The air smelled faintly of rain from the night before, wet asphalt glistening under the rising sun. Cars moved in impatient lines, horns echoing in the distance. She walked the same route she always did, past the corner bakery where the smell of fresh bread tempted her, past the bookstore with dust-coated windows, past the bus stop where tired workers waited silently. Her shoes, scuffed and worn, splashed through shallow puddles. She rehearsed the day's lesson in her mind, reading comprehension, fractions, and a small surprise quiz. Teaching wasn't glamorous, but to her it was purpose. Every child in her classroom deserved to feel seen, to feel capable, even if the rest of the world ignored them. As she approached the crosswalk near the main avenue, her mind wandered to the bills she had yet to pay. The sound of the city blurred until she heard it. A sharp cry. Her eyes snapped forward. Across the street, a small boy, no more than 6 or 7, had slipped away from his distracted nanny. The child's tiny shoes tapped urgently on the asphalt as he chased after a red ball that had rolled into traffic. Time seemed to slow. The boy's hair was tousled by the morning wind, his face filled with innocent determination, oblivious to the danger bearing down on him. From the corner of her eye, Elena saw it, headlights rushing forward, a car accelerating as the light turned green. "Stop!" she shouted, but the noise of engines drowned her out. She didn't think, she didn't plan. Instinct took over, the papers in her arms spilled. Across the sidewalk as she ran, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. The sound of screeching tires filled the air, mingling with the gasps of onlookers frozen in shock. She reached him just as the car closed in. Her hands grabbed the boy's shoulders, pulling him with all the strength she had. The two of them tumbled backward onto the curb, the vehicle screeching past with inches to spare. The smell of burnt rubber filled the air. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the child began to cry, loud, panicked sobs, his tiny fists clutching at her coat. Elena wrapped her arms around him, shushing softly, her own breath ragged, heart still hammering against her ribs. "You're safe," she whispered, though her own hands trembled. "You're safe now." Bystanders began to murmur, phones lifted to record the scene. The nanny, pale and shaking, rushed forward, her words tumbling over one another in apology and shock. I only looked away for a second," she stammered, reaching for the boy, but he clung tighter to Elena, burying his face in her shoulder. His tears soaked into the fabric of her coat, and she realized he wasn't ready to let go. She smoothed his hair gently, rocking him as if he were one of her own students after a bad dream. Around them, the world was a blur of horns, gasps, and whispers. But in that moment, All she saw was the small life trembling in her arms, the fragile thread that had almost been severed. Elena wasn't a hero. She was just a teacher, late for work, with too many responsibilities and too little time. Yet fate had chosen her to be there, at that exact second, in that exact place. As she finally looked up, meeting the wide eyes of the gathered crowd, a shiver ran down her spine. She didn't know it yet, but this single act, the decision to run forward instead of looking away, would ripple into a storm larger than anything she had ever imagined. For now, all she knew was the sound of the boy's sobs quieting again. Her chest, the brush of cool morning air against her skin, and the faint echo of tires disappearing down the street. The day had begun like any other. But in the span of a heartbeat, Elena Carter's life had changed forever. The world seemed to stop the moment her knees hit the concrete. Her arms wrapped tightly around the boy, shielding him from everything, the noise, the danger, the chaos that had almost claimed him. The sound of tires screeching still hung in at the air like a violent echo, mingling with the acrid scent of burned rubber. Gasps rippled through the bystanders. Some clutched their mouths, others froze mid-step. The city's relentless rhythm had been broken, the flow of cars and footsteps disrupted by the sight of an ordinary woman throwing herself into harm's way. Elena's heart hammered in her chest. Each thud was so loud it drowned out the murmurs of the crowd. She wasn't sure if the boy could feel it, pressed as he was against her, but she knew he could sense her trembling. "It's all right," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly, but she steadied it. "You're okay. You're safe now." The child clung to her coat, his sobs ragged and wet. His small hands twisted the fabric with desperate strength, refusing to let go. He smelled faintly of vanilla cookies and dust, the scent of innocence, mixed with the sharp tang of fear. Behind them, the car that had nearly ended everything rolled to a stop a few feet away. The driver stumbled out, pale, muttering apologies into the air, his hands shaking as he lifted them helplessly. I didn't see him. I swear I didn't see him." But Elena barely heard. Her focus was on the child, his wide, tear-filled eyes staring up at her. His face was flushed red from crying, but beneath the tears there was something. Fragility, yes, but also trust. A complete surrender to the arms that had saved him. The nanny finally caught up, her face drained of all colour. "Oh my God, oh! My God!" she repeated, kneeling beside them. "I'm so sorry. I looked away for just a moment." Eleanor lifted a hand, silencing her gently. "He's all right. That's what matters." Still the boy refused to release her. His tiny body shook with aftershocks of fear, and Elena knew that forcing him away would only make it worse. She shifted slightly, cradling him like a mother would. The crowd's whispers grew louder now, phones lifted, the faint clicks of cameras. Capturing the scene, a stranger's voice pierced through. "She saved him. That woman. She saved the kid." Another added, "Unbelievable. She could have been killed." But Elena didn't feel like a hero. She felt the scrape of concrete burning through her knees, the sting of her palms where they had hit the ground, and the sharp knot of fear still lodged in her chest. For a brief moment, her mind replayed the what-ifs. If she had been 1 second slower, if the car had been 1 foot closer, if she hadn't noticed at all. The thought made her hold him tighter. The boy sniffled against her shoulder, his voice, barely audible, cracked through the silence. "Don't let go." Eleanor's throat tightened. She stroked his hair softly, speaking in the calm, rhythmic tone she used with her students when nightmares or bullies left them in tears. "I won't," she promised. "I'm right here." She brushed off her own fear, steadying her breath until it matched the rhythm she tried to give him. Slowly, the tremors in his body eased, his sobs softening to hiccups. The world around them seemed to fade. The gawking crowd, the guilty driver, the frantic nanny. In this moment, there was only the boy, fragile and trembling, and the quiet strength of her arms. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Finally, when she was sure his breathing had slowed, Elena gently pulled back enough to see his face. His eyes, a striking shade of hazel, met hers. They were filled with questions he couldn't yet ask. "Why did you save me? Who are you?" "Why? Aren't you afraid?" Elena smiled faintly, brushing a streak of dirt from his cheek. "You're very brave," she told him softly. "Braver than you know." The boy's grip loosened just a little, though his fingers still curled into her sleeve. The nanny, regaining her composure, reached out again. "Please, let me take him now." Eleanor hesitated. For a moment, she considered refusing, protective instinct still flaring in her chest. But finally, she shifted the child gently toward the nanny. As his small arms left her, the boy turned his head, eyes locked on her, as if afraid she might vanish the moment he let go. The nanny gathered him quickly, thanking Eleanor over and over, but her words barely registered. Elena stood slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. Her papers, scattered across the sidewalk, fluttered in the morning breeze like wounded birds. She crouched to gather them, her fingers trembling, her mind replaying the rescue in endless loops. To her, it was over. A terrifying moment, a brush with tragedy, but nothing more. She was late for work now. The principal would scold her. The children would be restless, and life would march forward. She didn't yet realize the truth, that this boy was no ordinary child, and his father no ordinary man. She didn't yet realize that this single act of bravery would unravel her quiet world and pull her into a life of power, danger, and unshakable bonds. For now, Eleanor Carter was simply a teacher who had risked her life without thinking. A hero, in disguise, brushing off her own fear as if it were nothing, unaware that her fate had already changed forever. The street was still buzzing with whispers when the sound of an engine, deeper and more commanding than the others, rolled into earshot. Heads turned as a sleek black car, polished to a mirror shine, slowed to a stop at the curb. It didn't belong to this neighborhood. Its presence cut through the chaos like a blade through water. The door opened and a man stepped out. Tall, immaculately dressed, his black suit fit him as though it were tailored from steel. His face, chiseled and unreadable, carried the kind of authority that could silence a room without a word. Even before anyone recognized who he was, the air shifted. Adrian Vale. To the world, the name carried weight. Billionaire industrialist, empire builder, a man who could bend markets with a single decision. To those standing nearby, it was a shock. To see him here, in this ordinary street, his gaze fixed on the boy clinging to the nanny's side. For all his power, Adrian's mask slipped for a moment when his eyes landed on his son. His lips parted, his shoulders tensed, relief breaking through his carefully constructed armor. But just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by the cold control of a man who could never afford weakness. "Ethan," he said, his voice low but firm. The boy's head jerked up at the sound. His eyes, still wet with tears, widened. "Papa!" His small body twisted, struggling to break free from the nanny's arms. The child ran to his father, colliding against the crisp fabric of his suit, burying himself against the man's chest. Adrian knelt, his hand resting on the boy's back, steadying him. For an instant, the steel melted, his eyes closed, his chin lowered as he inhaled the fragile warmth of his son. But it lasted only a breath. He straightened, his gaze rising past the boy, locking onto the woman who still stood by the scattered papers on the sidewalk. Elena Carter. She froze as those eyes, icy grey, sharp as a hawk's, fixed on her. Around them, the crowd seemed to fade, their whispers dissolving into silence. The billionaire's presence had eclipsed everything else. He stepped forward slowly, each movement precise, deliberate, a man accustomed to being watched. "You," he said. His tone wasn't gratitude, it was an interrogation wrapped in authority. Elena tightened her grip on the stack of bent papers she had gathered, her pulse quickening. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with as much steadiness as she could muster. "Yes. Your son almost stepped into the street." I pulled him back. The words sounded smaller than the reality of what had happened, but she forced them out calmly. Adrian's jaw clenched. His eyes scanned her, her modest coat, her trembling hands, the faint scuff on her shoes. A woman with nothing, a stranger. He narrowed his gaze as though searching for the hidden price tag behind her actions. "My son," he said slowly, his voice like stone grinding against stone, "is alive because of you." There was no warmth in his tone, only the statement. A fact, as though he were marking a debt in his mental ledger. Elena swallowed, her throat dry. He's safe. That's what matters. For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, that she hadn't launched into explanation, hadn't seized the moment to ask for recognition or reward. Most people in his world would have. Every interaction with him was a negotiation. Every favor came with a price. But she simply stood there, brushing a strand of hair from her face, her eyes steady despite the tremor in her hands. Adrian turned, slightly, addressing the nanny without removing his eyes from Elena. "How did this happen?" the nanny stammered. I looked away for only a second, sir." The ball rolled into the street and she saved him, someone from the crowd called out, unable to resist. A ripple of agreement moved through the bystanders. Words like brave, hero, risked her life, floated in the air. Adrian ignored them. He focused entirely on Elena, studying her in silence. Seconds stretched, heavy and suffocating. "Why?" he asked finally. Elena blinked, startled. "Why? What?" "Why risk yourself?" His voice cut through the noise, measured and sharp. "You could have been killed." The question was not born of gratitude. It was suspicion, accusation. Elena hesitated. She could have spoken of instinct, of humanity, of what any decent person should do. Instead, she let the truth fall simply from her lips. Because he's a child, because no one else moved fast enough. Adrian's stare didn't soften, but something behind his eyes shifted, a shadow of thought flickering and then vanishing. He looked down at his son, who clung to his hand, refusing to let go. The boy's eyes were fixed not on him, but on Elena, Adrian noticed. He always noticed. The crowd pressed in closer, cameras still raised, eager to capture every second. Adrian turned his head toward his driver, who stood at attention beside the sleek car. "Clear this area," Adrian ordered, his tone brooking. No hesitation. The driver moved quickly, ushering people back, blocking phones with an outstretched hand. The murmurs grew fainter. The street slowly returned to motion, though the air still trembled with tension. Now it was only Adrian, his son, the nanny, and the woman who had saved his child. He studied her one last time. "What's your name?" "Eleanor Carter," she answered quietly. The name etched itself into his mind. He didn't thank her. Instead, he gave a curt nod, acknowledgement without warmth, like signing the bottom of a contract. Adrian lifted his son into his arms, the boy still looking back at her, hazel eyes lingering as though tethered by an invisible thread. Adrian turned, carrying him toward the car, his broad shoulders cutting a shadow across the pavement. The door closed, the engine purred, and within moments the car melted back into the city traffic, leaving only the faint shimmer of exhaust in the air. Elena stood rooted on the sidewalk, papers pressed against her chest, the echo of grey eyes still burning in her mind. She had saved a child, nothing more. To her, the moment was over. Life would move forward, classes would begin, lessons would be taught. But to Adrian Vale, every action had consequence. Every debt demanded balance. And whether she wanted it or not, Elena Carter's life had just been bound to his in ways neither could yet imagine. The city has a way of carrying rumors faster than the wind. By the time Eleanor Carter arrived at school the next morning, the whispers had already begun. She walked through the familiar gates of Westbrook Primary, the sound of children's laughter, carrying across the playground. For years this place had been her sanctuary, walls covered in drawings, hallways echoing with chatter, desks scarred with pencil marks. But today, the air felt different. Eyes followed her. The janitor paused mid-sweep. Two parents lingered by the gate longer than usual, their voices lowered but their glances sharp. Even the secretary at the front desk, who normally offered a cheerful good morning, gave her a look that lingered a second too long. Elena kept her step steady, her books pressed close to her chest. She'd saved a child's life, that was all. Yet somehow the world had turned it into a spectacle. By lunchtime, the whispers had solidified into stories. She's the one who jumped in front of the car. Risked her life for that boy. They say the father is Adrian Vale, you... No, the billionaire. Maybe she'll never have to work again if he rewards her. Elena overheard fragments in the staff lounge. Some voices held admiration, others envy, and a few carried thinly veiled suspicion. "Don't you think it's strange?" one teacher murmured to another, unaware Eleanor was in earshot. Why would anyone risk themselves like that, unless she knew who the boy was? "She's not like that," another argued softly. "Elena's the most selfless person here." But doubt, once planted, had a way of spreading. Elena stirred her tea silently, pretending not to hear. She had no interest in their speculation, yet her stomach knotted with unease. This was the last thing she wanted, attention. She was a teacher, not a hero, and certainly not someone meant to stand in the orbit of a man like Adrian Vale. And yet, far across the city, Adrian Vale was already pulling her name through the machinery of his world. In his penthouse office, overlooking the skyline, a manila file lay open on his desk. Elena Carter, 34 years old, teacher at Westbrook Primary. No criminal record, no debts, no connections to corporations or politics. A life so ordinary it almost unsettled him. Adrian leaned back in his leather chair, his grey eyes scanning the pages. His son slept in the next room, watched over by nurses. Ethan had whispered her name before bed, clinging to a memory Adrian could not erase. He tapped a finger against the file. "Why?" he muttered to himself. "Why her? Why then?" His head of security, a tall man named Kincaid, shifted uneasily nearby. "She checks out clean, sir. Nothing unusual. No ties, no leverage. just a schoolteacher. Adrian's lips pressed into a thin line. In his world, no one did anything without motive. Every kindness was currency, every gesture a mask for negotiation. Yet she had risked herself with no thought of reward. It unsettled him more than he cared to admit. "Keep watching," Adrian ordered finally. Discreetly, "I want to know everything, even what she had for breakfast." Kincaid nodded. Back at Westbrook Primary, Eleanor continued her day with as much normalcy as she could muster. She guided her students through arithmetic, praised their efforts in reading, and smiled at their childish jokes. But each time she caught a colleague's eyes lingering on her, or a parent's whisper at the gate, she felt the invisible threads tightening around her life. At home that evening, she collapsed onto her couch, exhaustion pressing heavy on her bones. The television buzzed faintly in the background, but her mind wandered to the boy's face, the way his hazel eyes had filled with trust as he clung to her. She wondered if he was all right. She wondered if he had slept. Then she pushed the thought away. This wasn't her world. She couldn't afford to linger in it, but the worlds were already colliding. The following week, the whispers grew sharper. A few parents requested private meetings with the principal, questioning whether it was appropriate for a teacher to be entangled with a family as powerful and controversial as Adrian Vale's. "She'll bring attention to the school," one complained. "She's just looking for opportunities," another accused. The principal, though polite, hinted to Elena that she should keep a low profile, as if she had asked for any of this. Elena left the office with her jaw clenched, her patience thinning. She hadn't sought attention, nor had she asked for Adrian Vale's shadow to loom over her quiet life. She just wanted to teach, to live simply, to be invisible. But invisibility was no longer an option. That night, as she walked home, she noticed a car idling too long near her street. A figure sitting inside, the glow of a cigarette briefly lighting his face. When she turned to look again, the car pulled away. Her heart quickened. She shook it off, convincing herself it was nothing. But deep down, she knew. Someone was watching across the city. Adrian reviewed another report. His suspicions hadn't been satisfied. No scandal, no leverage, no hidden past, just an ordinary woman who had done something extraordinary. He set the file aside and poured himself a drink. Through the glass walls of his penthouse, the city stretched endlessly. Neon lights, towers of glass, streets teeming with ambition and hunger. He lived in a world built on control, on power, on the cold mathematics of gain and loss. She lived in a world of chalkboards, children's laughter, and worn-out shoes. They should have remained separate. Two worlds never meant to touch, and yet destiny had forced them together in the middle of a busy street, with screeching tires and the sound of a child's sobs binding them in ways neither could undo. Adrian Vale did not believe in coincidences. He believed in control, in design. But for the first time in years, something had slipped beyond his reach. And the more he thought about it, the less he could let it go. Elena Carter, meanwhile, lay awake in her modest apartment, staring at the ceiling as rain tapped against the window. She told herself tomorrow would be ordinary again. But some part of her, quiet, stubborn, and unshakable, knew the truth. Ordinary was gone. The worlds of the billionaire and the teacher had collided, and the impact had only just begun. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. It was thick, heavy, and cream-colored, its weight alone suggesting importance. Her name, Elena Carter, was written in sharp black ink across the front. It lay on her desk at the end of the school day, delivered. by a man in a dark suit who vanished before she could ask a single question. Inside, on thick paper embossed with silver edges, were only a few words. "Mr. Adrian Vale requests the honor of your presence this Friday evening at his residence. Transportation will be provided, no explanation, no signature, no refusal option." Elena sat at her desk long after the children had gone, the note trembling between her fingers. She told herself she didn't have to go. She owed him nothing. But something in the phrasing, formal yet undeniable, made it clear. This wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. And so, on Friday evening, as the sun slipped beneath the skyline, she found herself stepping out of a sleek, black car onto a driveway that gleamed like polished stone. Before her rose a mansion unlike anything she had ever imagined. The Vale estate was less a home and more a fortress of glass and steel, its architecture a blend of modern sharpness and old-world grandeur. Spotlights illuminated towering marble columns. Expansive windows glowed with golden light, giving glimpses of opulent rooms within. She smoothed her modest dress, a simple navy blue number borrowed from her sister, and told herself to breathe. The front doors opened before she could knock. Two staff members, clad in black, ushered her in without a word. The interior stunned her. Crystal chandeliers dripped from ceilings so high they seemed to touch the clouds. Floors of polished marble reflected her hesitant steps. Paintings, real, original masterpieces, lined the walls, their gilded frames worth more than she would earn in a lifetime. Every corner whispered wealth, every detail proclaimed power. But beneath the grandeur there was something else, a stillness, a hostility, as though the very walls resented her presence. The staff's eyes lingered just a moment too long, their silence thick with judgment. They saw her as an intruder, an outsider who had no business standing in the orbit of Adrian Vale. "Miss Carter," a deep voice said from across the hall. She turned. There he was, standing at the far end of the corridor, framed by the golden light of the chandeliers. Adrian Vale. His black suit was immaculate, his posture as commanding as the building itself. He walked toward her with the precision of a man who had never stumbled in his life. Elena's heart hammered, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Mr. Vale," she replied, steady though her hands fidgeted at her side. He studied her silently. For a moment, his eyes sharp, dissecting. Then, with a slight tilt of his head, he gestured. "This way." She followed him down a hallway lined with art and history. Rare sculptures, artifacts encased in glass, the kind of wealth most people only saw in museums. The silence between them pressed heavily, broken only by the soft echo of their footsteps. Finally, they entered a room that contrasted sharply with the grandeur outside. It was warm, lined with bookshelves and filled with the faint scent of leather and old paper. A fire crackled in the hearth. It felt less like a billionaire's lair and more like a study, a place of thought rather than display. Sitting on a plush chair near the fire was Ethan. The boy's face lit up the moment he saw her. "Miss Carter," before Adrian could say a word, Ethan leapt from his chair and ran straight into Elena's arms. He clung to her tightly, just as he had that day on the street. Elena knelt, hugging him back, her heart softening at the trust in his eyes. "Hello, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm glad to see you again." Adrian watched, expression unreadable. But something flickered in his eyes, a tension, as if he were witnessing something he couldn't quite control. Ethan refused to let go, burying his face in her shoulder. "I told Papa you'd come," he said, muffled by her coat. Elena smiled faintly, brushing his hair back. "And here I am." Adrian cleared his throat. "That will do, Ethan. Give Miss Carter some space." But the boy shook his head fiercely, his grip tightening. For the first time, Adrian's command held no weight. Elena rose slowly, Ethan still in her arms. She turned to Adrian, her voice calm but firm. "He's frightened. Let him hold on a little longer." For a moment, silence stretched between them. No one spoke to Adrian Vale that way, not his employees, not his business rivals, not even heads of state. Yet here was a schoolteacher standing in his home, challenging his authority with nothing but quiet conviction. And instead of anger, Adrian felt something else, curiosity. He poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to her. She declined with a shake of her head. "I don't drink." He arched a brow. "Not even here?" Her answer was simple. "Not anywhere." He studied her again, searching for cracks, for signs of weakness or performance. But she remained steady, her presence disarming in its honesty. "Why are you here, Miss Carter?" he asked finally. "You invited me," she replied. That faint smile, brief, almost reluctant, tugged at the corner of his mouth. Most people would see this as an opportunity. They'd ask for something, money, connections, influence, but you haven't asked for anything at all. Elena's gaze didn't waver. "Because I don't want anything. I saved your son." "Because he needed saving, that's all." Her words hung in the air, sharper than any business deal Adrian had ever struck. He was a man accustomed to hidden motives, to favors wrapped in smiles, to lies dressed as gratitude. But she was neither liar nor opportunist. She was simply herself, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The fire crackled. Ethan shifted in her arms, finally loosening his grip, though his small hand still clung to hers. His eyes, so full of trust, darted between his father and his teacher. For the first time in years, Adrian Vale found himself at a loss for words. Nights were the hardest for Ethan. Since the accident, he woke often in a cold sweat, his cries echoing down the vast marble halls of the Vale estate. Servants rushed to soothe him, but their voices, though gentle, could never pierce the terror clamped around his small heart. He called only for one person, someone who didn't belong to this world of chandeliers and velvet drapes. "Miss Carter," he whispered through trembling lips, night after night. At first, Adrian thought it was temporary, a child's fragile attachment born out of fear. But as the days stretched on, Ethan's insistence grew. He refused to eat unless Elena visited. He would not leave his bed for lessons unless she promised to be nearby. Even his laughter, once rare, returned only in her presence. Reluctantly, Adrian allowed it. Elena began visiting in the evenings, her modest shoes squeaking softly against the polished floors as staff exchanged glances of disapproval. She carried books from her classroom, fairy tales, adventures, small paperbacks worn from the eager hands of children. Ethan would curl against her side on the oversized couch, his tiny body swallowed by the cushions, as her steady voice painted worlds of knights and forests and brave little children who always found their way home. One night, after she closed the last page, Ethan pressed his cheek against her shoulder. "When you read, the bad dreams don't come," he whispered. Lena smoothed his hair, her heart aching. "Then I'll keep reading until you don't need me anymore." But Ethan's hazel eyes blinked up at her with fierce determination. "I'll always need you." Adrian, watching silently from the doorway, felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had hired the best tutors, the best doctors, given his son everything money could buy. Yet none of them could reach Ethan the way this modest schoolteacher did, with nothing but her voice and her patience. It infuriated him and unsettled him. The next day, Adrian confronted her in his study, the walls lined with shelves of first editions and portraits of men who had built empires. He stood by the window, city lights glowing like stars beneath him. "You're making my son dependent on you," he said without turning. Elena set the book she had been carrying onto the desk, her tone calm. "He's already dependent on something, Mr. Vale. Fear. I'm just giving him something else to hold on to." He turned then, his grey eyes sharp. "You speak as though you understand him better than I do." Her answer was quiet, but steady. "Maybe I do, because I'm not trying to control him. I'm trying to listen." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He dismissed her with a curt nod, though her words echoed in his mind long after she left. In the days that followed, Ethan began to change. The boy, who had once hidden from the world, now dared to play in the gardens again, chasing butterflies beneath the stone arches. He asked questions with bright curiosity, his laughter ringing like bells through the halls. At night, he slept longer, his breathing even, his nightmares fading into memory. Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed. He saw it in the way Ethan's shoulders relaxed, in the way his eyes no longer darted to shadows. He saw it in the spark of joy he thought had been extinguished forever after Ethan's mother's death. But pride is a cruel master. He could not bring himself to thank her. Not yet. Gratitude in his world was weakness. And weakness was something Adrian Vale could not afford. Instead, he watched from a distance, his son curled in Elena's lap by the fire, her voice steady as she guided him through stories of courage and kindness. And though Adrian said nothing, something unfamiliar stirred within him, a longing he could neither name nor bury. One evening, as she prepared to leave, Ethan clung to her hand. "Please stay tonight," he begged, his voice breaking. Elena knelt, cupping his face. "I can't, sweetheart. I have to go home, but I'll come back tomorrow." His lip trembled. "Promise," she smiled gently. "Promise." When she finally left, Adrian stood in the shadows of the hall, watching the way Ethan's eyes followed her until the door closed. Later, in the solitude of his study, Adrian poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the city lights. He stared at the file on his desk, her file. No debts, no scandals, no secrets. Just an ordinary woman with extraordinary patience. And yet she had succeeded where he had failed. He hated that. He respected it. He couldn't look away from it. That night, as Ethan slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Adrian admitted what he could not say aloud. His son needed her, and perhaps, though he would never confess it, he did too. The story broke in the most careless way. A blurry photograph snapped through the tinted window of a car idling outside the Vale estate. A woman in a simple navy dress, her hair pinned back, stepping out beneath a chandelier of light. "Teacher, linked to Billionaire after dramatic rescue," the caption whispered. And that was enough for the city to start talking. Elena saw it on a stranger's phone at the corner bakery the next morning, her own face reflected back to her in the glass. Case of croissants. A murmur rose behind her. The cashier paused mid-sentence. By the time she crossed the school gates, the gossip had grown legs. "Is that her? The one from the article? They say he sent a car, a private driver." Inside Westbrook Primary, The hallways felt narrower, sound tunneling like the inside of a seashell. The principal's door was ajar. Ms. Patel looked up with cautious sympathy. "Elena, a word?" They closed the door. The blinds cast thin bars of shadow across the desk. "I trust you," Ms. Patel began, folding her hands. "But we've had calls from parents. They're worried about optics. They're asking whether your involvement with Mr. Vale might be distracting." "Involvement?" Eleanor repeated, almost laughing. "I read to his son so he can sleep." "I know," Ms. Patel's voice softened. "But the world outside doesn't. I'm asking you to be careful." Elena left with a knot in her chest and a swarm of whispers at her back. She stepped into her classroom, into the sanctuary of crayons and book bins and tiny chairs that squeaked against linoleum. 20 faces beamed up at her, children who did not speak in rumors. Their trust steadied her. Across the city, in a building of glass that touched the clouds, Adrian Vale stood at his office window, the skyline arranged beneath him like an obedient chessboard. He did not look at the view. He studied the open file. On his desk, clippings, photographs, crisp sheets of text. Elena Carter, a life reduced to paragraphs. Kincaid hovered a respectful distance away. "The photo ran in 3 outlets," he said. "Mostly gossip. Your son's name is blurred." Adrian's jaw flexed, a muscle ticking along the line of his cheek. "Blurred is not erased." He closed the file and opened another, older, thicker, worn at the corners from overuse. Names, dates, transactions. His gaze snagged on a photograph of a man with a blade-smooth smile, Marcus Hale, once a partner, almost a brother. Now a ghost with fingerprints on every locked door inside Adrian's mind. The betrayal had come like a fever. Documents siphoned in the night, a project sabotaged, a swirl of lawsuits and threats. It happened the same season Livia died. 2 ruptures at once, business gutted from the inside, home emptied of its light. Ethan was 4 and stopped speaking for almost a year. Adrian had learned to breathe through a permanent vice. "Any new movement from Hale?" Adrian asked. "Whispers," Kincaid said. "He's circling the Halcyon bid again. And, sir, someone sent this." Kincaid slid a thin envelope across the desk. Inside was a single photograph. Elena leaving Westbrook Primary, head down, papers held to her chest. Across the bottom, in letters cut from a magazine, "Everyone has a price." Adrian's eyes cooled to mercury. "Increase security on both of them," he said. "Discreetly," Kincaid nodded. "And Miss Carter? She's not part of this world." The words sounded like a vow and a lie at once. "But our enemies will try to make her so." That evening, the mansion felt like a museum of quiet. The staff moved like clockwork shadows, neat, precise, disapproving. Ms. Whitmore, the house manager with a spine of glass, met Elena at the IE foyer with a tone polished to civility. "We'll bring you to the library," she said. "Please refrain from wandering. Certain wings are private." "I'm only here for Ethan," Elena answered and moved on without waiting for permission. The library door whispered shut behind her. Leather, paper, firelight. The room breathed differently than the rest of the house. Ethan darted from a window seat, feet silent on the Persian rug, joy flooding his face like summer after storm. "You came," he said, relief cracking his voice. "I promised," she said, and opened a storybook. The sound of her reading unspooled the knots in the boy's shoulders. He leaned into her, the tremble in his fingers quieting. When she paused to turn a page, He pressed closer, anchoring himself to a voice that felt like home. From the threshold, Adrian watched the scene that undid him, his son safe, his son small, his son allowing another person to hold what he had guarded like a brittle secret. It sparked gratitude, and with it, the splintering edge of fear. He did not know how to owe anyone anything. When the chapter ended, Ethan dozed against Elena's arm, his breath feathering the fabric of her sleeve. She looked up and met Adrian's gaze. For once, he didn't look away. "Who is she?" Elena asked quietly, nodding to a portrait above the mantel. A woman with dark eyes and a laugh trapped in the paint, pearls at her throat like a string of moonlight. Adrian's face hardly moved. "Livia," he said. "Ethan's mother." "Eleanor?" Waited for more. None came. She placed a hand over the boy's hair. "She hates cameras," Ethan murmured, half asleep. "Mommy did." The sentence hung between them like a delicate bridge. Elena did not try to cross it. She returned to the book, to the page, to the safe litany of words. The next day, rumor changed shape. A parent with a sharp manicure and the confidence of wealth intercepted Elena outside the school. "Ms. Carter," she said, smile tight. "Meredith Sloan, PTA." Elena shifted the stack of worksheets in her arms. "Good morning." "We value discretion," Meredith said, the word bending like cutlery. "Children need stability. Your situation with Mr. Vale, perhaps it's time to consider what's best for our community." "What's best," Elena said evenly, "is that your children learn and that Ethan sleeps." Colour climbed Meredith's cheeks. "It looks like you're positioning yourself." "After the accident, now the visits, the press can be unkind." "I'm not positioning for anything," Elena said. "I'm reading a child to sleep." Meredith's smile sharpened. "Of course." She stepped aside, the scent of expensive perfume trailing behind like a claim. Inside, Elena taught fractions the way she always had, turning numbers into pies, mistakes into laughter. But when her students filed out, the classroom emptied into a loneliness that startled her. For a long moment, she sat with her head in her hands, listening to the quiet throb of the building. A knock at the door. Kincaid stood there, large enough to fill the frame but careful enough to shrink himself. "May I?" he asked. She gestured to a chair. He did not take it. "There's noise," he said. "Most of it useless. Some of it dangerous. If anyone approaches you with questions, reporters, friends of the family, men who talk like they already know the answers, send them away. Call me." "I don't have your number," Elena said. "You do now." He slid a card across her desk. "And Miss Carter, your instinct saved Ethan once. Trust it again." When he left, she stared at the card a long time. The black letters were a map to a different world. That night, the library carried the rhythm of routine. Book, blanket, breath. But when the last page turned, Adrian spoke from the shadowed edge of the firelight. "You've been painted a social climber," he said, voice even. "A woman with an angle," Elena folded the book closed. "Do you believe that?" "I believe. People are what they want most," he said, "even when they don't say it." "And what do you want most, Mr. Vale?" The question slipped out before she could retrieve it. He stared at her the way a man stares at a locked safe and hears movement inside. Then he looked past her to his son, asleep at last. "To never owe another human being anything," he said, "and to keep him safe." She nodded, not filling the silence with comfort he hadn't asked for. "I won't take your debt," she said, "and I'm not here to collect." Something in him registered the shape of those words and filed them away where only he could reach. He crossed to the desk and opened a drawer. A thin envelope lay inside, the second one this week. Letters cut from magazines, a taunt pasted into, meaning, "How much for a conscience?" He slid it back with a click he hoped she hadn't heard. "Ethan told me you don't like the cameras," she said, eyes on the portrait. "They turned my wife's death into content," he replied. The sentence, sanded down to bare wood. "I learned to starve them." "Grief likes silence," Elena said. "So do children." He studied her as if the statement might be a code. She did not elaborate. She gathered her bag. In the hall, Ms. Whitmore materialized like a reprimand. "If you require assistance." "Navigating the press at the gate," she said. "We can arrange a discreet exit. For the household's sake." "For Ethan's sake," Elena said gently, "I'll use the front door." She walked out beneath the chandelier, the light cold on marble, cameras pricking at the edge of the dark. When the flash popped, she didn't flinch. Somewhere near the gate, a voice slithered from the shadows. "Smile, Miss Carter. Heroes sell." She kept moving. The next morning, an anonymous post bloomed on a gossip forum. "Teacher's secret. She's after more than gratitude." A cropped photo of Eleanor's hand on Ethan's shoulder. A circle drawn in red around the glint of a borrowed ring. The comments multiplied like mold. At lunch, 2 teachers paused when she entered the lounge. One offered a guilty half-smile, the other didn't bother. "She'll get a book deal," someone muttered. "Watch." Elena poured tea and pretended. Her hands were steady. The steam lifted, ghosting her face. She thought of Ethan counting breaths against her sleeve. She thought of the envelope on Adrian's desk she'd never seen, and the men who watched from cars that drove away when she turned. She thought of Livia in pearls and a painted laugh, frozen above a fireplace too tall for comfort. Late that afternoon, the storm broke more directly. A reporter waited by the school gate, sharp suit, softer eyes. "Ms. Carter," he said, holding up a badge. "No ambush, just context. People should know what you've done." "What I've done," she said, "is go to work. Is there a romance?" He softened the word as if it might bruise. "There is a child," she answered, and walked past. That night, she found Adrian in the study, sleeves rolled, tie undone, as if the day had come at him with its fists up. A map of the city glowed on his wall, dots of light marking deals, battlefields, borders only he could see. "Your world eats people," she said quietly. "I built it to keep people from eating me," he replied. They stood there a moment, the fire speaking in small collapses of coal. "I don't pry," she said at last. "I won't. But if Ethan asks questions I can't answer, I'll tell him the truth, that his father is complicated and trying." He blinked, as if the sentence had found a door no one had noticed and opened it a crack. Then he nodded, once, in a... The corridor, Kincaid appeared like a punctuation mark. "We've doubled the perimeter," he murmured to Adrian. "Movement near the east gate. Might be nothing. Might be Hale's dogs sniffing." "Keep them outside the fence," Adrian said. Kincaid's gaze flicked to Elena. "And you? Call if anything feels wrong. The kind of wrong your bones know." She tucked his card into the worn cover of her book. When she left, rain had begun, fine and persistent, turning the driveway into a slick ribbon. Headlights washed the street. A car idled a little too long at the corner, then slid away. She walked the last block to the bus stop, umbrella tapping a slow metronome against her shoulder. The city smelled like wet stone and old stories. At home, she set her phone face down. The screen still lit her kitchen with a jittery light. Messages from colleagues, a cousin she hadn't heard from in months, a number she didn't recognize promising to tell your side. She made tea instead. The kettle sang. The sound threaded through the small apartment and soothed nothing and everything. Across town, a single light burned in the topmost window of the Vale estate. Adrian stood there with a glass he didn't drink and a decision he didn't name. In the room below, Ethan slept with a book under his pillow, his fingers curved around an invisible hand. Between those windows and that pillow, two worlds lay, like tectonic plates, wealth and want, power and plainness, pressing hard, grinding, preparing the earth for something it had not yet decided to be. Outside, the rain went on, steady, patient, like the kind of truth no rumor could drown. The notice came in a plain white envelope slipped under her apartment door. The kind of envelope that never brought good news. Elena picked it up after a long day at school, her shoulders aching from hours of standing, her throat raw from raising, her voice over restless children, inside final reminder, rent overdue. The words blurred for a moment as she sank into the worn couch, the paper shaking in her hands. She had stretched every dollar, skipped dinners, tutored after hours, but it hadn't been enough. Her modest teacher's salary had never been generous, and with whispers swirling about her supposed connection to Adrian Vale, extra tutoring jobs had dried up. Parents politely declined her offers. Some avoided her altogether. Her phone buzzed, a utility bill, equally unforgiving. She closed her eyes, pressing her fingertips to her temples. The city outside hummed with its indifferent rhythm, neon lights flickering against cracked walls. But tomorrow morning she would stand before her students as though nothing were wrong. At Westbrook Primary, the tension had thickened like fog. The hallways, once filled with laughter, now carried sharp-edged whispers. Parents lingered longer at the gates, their voices lowered, but their eyes pointed. "She's in Vale's pocket now," one mother muttered. "It's only a matter of time before she leaves teaching for something more profitable," another replied. Even her colleagues weren't immune. In the staff lounge, conversations paused when she entered. A few teachers offered tight smiles. Others didn't bother hiding their suspicion. "Must be nice," one said under her breath. "Rescuing Billionaire's children. Can't imagine she worries about bills anymore." Elena forced herself to keep walking, head high, though her fists clenched around the stack of lesson plans in her hands. If only they knew the truth, that her fridge was half empty, her rent unpaid, her nights spent staring at numbers that never added up. In the classroom, however, her resolve never cracked. She knelt beside students struggling with fractions, her patience unshaken. She listened to stories about playground fights, broken pencils, and lost lunch boxes with the same gravity she gave to novels and history lessons. "Every problem has a solution," she told them gently. "Even if it feels too big right now." Her students didn't know about the rumors, the rent notices, the weight pressing on her chest. To them, she was simply Miss Carter, the teacher who stayed late to help, who slipped granola bars into desks when lunches were forgotten, who believed in them when no one else did. One afternoon, the principal called her into the office again. "Elena," Ms. Patel began, her tone measured, "you know I value you. You're one of our best, but the board is unsettled. The attention on you, the connection to Mr. Vale, it's creating pressure." "I didn't ask for any of this," Elena said, her voice tight. "I know, Ms. Patel said softly. "But some parents have threatened to pull their children unless we address the distraction." Address it how? Ms. Patel hesitated, then leaned forward. They want assurance. Either you distance yourself from the Vale family, or... She trailed off, the weight of the unspoken word heavy in the air. Elena's breath caught, fired. The possibility she had tried so hard to ignore was now staring her in the face. She rose from her chair, gathering the thin shield of her dignity. I won't abandon a child who needs me, not Ethan, not any of them. If that costs me my job, so be it. Ms. Patel looked at her with sorrow, as though she admired the strength and feared the consequences in equal measure. That evening, Elena returned to her apartment, weary but resolute. She dropped her bag, made tea with the last spoonful of sugar, and sat at the small kitchen table. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, filling the silence like a low, anxious heartbeat. Her phone buzzed again, a message from a colleague she trusted. Saw the posts online. They're saying you're positioning yourself for Vale's money. Don't read the comments. She didn't. She deleted the message instead and turned back to the stack of essays waiting for red ink. Meanwhile, in the towering estate across the city, Adrian read a different report. Parents are threatening her job, Kincaid informed him, placing the file on the desk. Online chatter's growing. They're painting her as opportunistic. It's pressure she can't carry alone. Adrian's gaze darkened. He flipped through the pages, screenshots, snippets of gossip, calculated attacks. His instinct was to crush it all with a single call, to buy silence, to bend the narrative until it snapped, but he hesitated. If he intervened, he would only prove the rumors true, that she was under his protection, a woman climbing by his name. And Elena Carter was not a woman who wanted saving. He poured himself a drink instead, though the amber liquid burned with the taste of helplessness. The next morning, Elena stood at her classroom door as her students trickled in. She greeted each by name, as she always did, even as exhaustion pulled at her eyes. One little girl, Sarah, tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Carter? My dad says you're friends with someone important. Is that true?" Eleanor crouched to her level, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. "Sarah, do you think I'm important?" Sarah nodded eagerly. "You help me with reading." "That's important." Elena smiled, though her throat tightened. "Then that's all you need to know?" She straightened, blinking back the sting in her eyes. Whatever the world outside chose to believe, her truth lived here, in the trust of children who saw her not as a rumor, but as the steady voice that told them they could. By evening, the apartment felt colder than usual. She pulled her coat tighter, sitting at the table beneath a single bulb that flickered every few seconds. She opened the stack of bills again, spreading them like cards across the wood. Rent, utilities, groceries, each one louder than the last. For a fleeting moment, she thought of Adrian Vale, of what it would mean to step into his world fully, to accept the protection he could so easily offer. Her burdens would vanish overnight, but so would her independence, her integrity, the very core of who she was. No, that price was too high. She gathered the bills into a neat pile, set them aside, and opened her lesson planner. Tomorrow was spelling tests. Tomorrow was multiplication, drills. Tomorrow the children would walk into her classroom expecting her to be steady, no matter what storms swirled beyond the walls. And steady she would be. Closing note. The world might doubt her. Parents might whisper, colleagues might question, the internet might distort. But Elena Carter knew who she was, a teacher, and teachers, above all, endured. Morning broke so clear it felt like it had been polished overnight. The rain had rinsed the city, leaving the streets bright and rinsed, the air sharp with the scent of wet metal and leaves. Outside Westbrook Primary, parents gathered in small clusters, coffee cups steaming, laughter skipping across the sidewalk like stones over water. Across the street, a white utility van idled with its hazard lights blinking. Its sides were unmarked. The driver wore a cap pulled low and a reflective vest as ordinary as a street lamp. He watched the school doors the way a tide watches a cliff, patient, inevitable. Inside, Elena moved through her last lesson with the calm cadence her students trusted. Spelling lists, whispered jokes, the soft squeal of chairs. An ordinary morning performing its small rituals, but something in her bones hummed off-key, a prickle along the skin. The feeling you get when the room looks the same, but the air does not. Kincaid's card lay beneath the corner of her desk blotter. She didn't look at it. She simply felt where it was, like a lighthouse you can locate, blindfolded. At 11:30, a message lit her phone. Change of plan. Driver will collect Ethan from the side gate at noon. Use East Corridor. JJ, the nanny, rarely texted in full sentences, and the words side gate scraped the wrong way. 2 weeks ago, after the photos and the whispers, Kincaid had given Elena the simplest piece of armor, a code phrase to verify pickups when plans changed. Blue umbrella, childish, almost silly, and therefore easy to remember under stress. Elena typed with steady fingers. Copy. What's the phrase? A beat. 2. Then hurry. He's upset. Her palms cooled. Wrong answer. She glanced toward the window. The white van's hazard lights winked like a bad joke. The lunch bell rang, scattering the class into happy chaos. Elena smiled, dismissed them, row by row, and kept Ethan by her desk with the unbreakable power of a teacher's hand on a shoulder. Hey, Captain, she said softly. Let's read while the hallway clears. Then we'll go find Jay. He nodded, trusting without question. He always did with her. In the corridor, footsteps passed like weather. Teachers, students, the rolling thunder of a custodial cart. Elena waited a full minute. Then she slipped out, not toward the east corridor, but toward the front office. She pressed the intercom button, voice calm, casual. Ms. Patel, it's Elena. Could you send Mr. Howard to check the east gate? I think a maintenance van is blocking the lane. On it, came the principal's voice. She didn't wait. She turned toward the library, the longest route to any exit, all windows and sightlines. As they moved, Ethan's small hand tightened inside hers. Is something wrong? He whispered. Just being careful, she murmured, like crossing a street. In the foyer, the world hiccuped. A man in a reflective vest rounded the corner, moving with the stilted politeness of someone. Rehearsing a part, Miss Carter? He asked, pronouncing it like a question he already knew the answer to. Jay asked me to. Elena smiled with the mildness of rain. Blue umbrella, she said. His blink was almost imperceptible. What? Blue umbrella, she repeated, cheerful as a nursery rhyme. A crease appeared between his brows. He recovered quickly. Right. Yes, umbrella. We should hurry. Her own smile didn't move. Office first, she said. I need to sign him out. She turned as if it were decided. The man's hand twitched toward his pocket, toward nothing. He recalibrated, stepping back with a concierge's flourish. They walked. Elena measured distance by breath, 3 to the water fountain, 5 to the trophy case, 8 to the door with wired glass that would show her what waited beyond. They didn't reach it. The fire alarm shrieked, an ugly, mechanical scream that ripped the air in two. Red strobes burst into frantic life. Children poured out of classrooms like water from a burst pipe. Teachers shepherded, counted, directed, voices raised against the klaxon. Fire drills were choreography. Westbrook knew the steps. Elena had not pulled this alarm, but as smoke curled low along the ceiling, smoke that smelled wrong, chemical, too fast, she understood. Someone had. She scooped Ethan into the cradle of her side, turned, and moved with the river of bodies toward the nearest exit. From behind, the man in the vest kept pace, not touching, never touching, close enough to claim concern if needed. The white van would be in the chaos, the east gate would be cleared, the crowd would make everything easier. Elena cut left at the last second into the art wing. Silence shoved in. The alarm was muffled here, the hallway empty, the lights too bright. Ethan clung to her, nails dimpling her skin. "Miss Carter?" "We're okay," she said, and listened. Rubber soles squeaked. 2 sets, coming fast. She pushed through the door to the kiln room, set Ethan behind a table, and pointed to the shallow cupboard beneath the counter. "Hide," she whispered. No sound. "Count your breaths. I'll be right here." He wanted to argue. He didn't. He crawled in, small, brave, the way children are when someone they trust tells them how. Elena grabbed the nearest thing with weight, a fire extinguisher, cold and heavy as a verdict. The footsteps turned the corner. The man in the vest entered with another behind him, taller, coat too long for the job, eyes so calm they were almost kind. "Miss Carter," the tall one said. His voice had the soft texture of money pretending to be sympathy. "This is unnecessary." She didn't answer. She let the extinguisher sit loose in her hands, not telegraphing weight. "Put it down," he said, still gentle. "We're here to help." "Blue umbrella," she said. He smiled. "We don't play games." "Then you don't get children," she said. The man with the vest moved first, fast and clumsy. Elena swung. The extinguisher caught his forearm with a flat, brutal sound. He howled, more insult than pain. The tall one was on her immediately, grabbing the cylinder. She let him take it and took something else, 3 steps backward, the sink counter between them, textbook distance from the cupboard. She saw the tall man make the calculation, how loud they could afford to be before a real adult arrived, how long the false smoke would keep the building in disarray, how quickly a small body could disappear into a van with no markings and a plate that wouldn't register for hours. She saw his decision the instant his mouth flattened. He came over the counter. Elena threw the powder. Not from the extinguisher, no, time. She reached for the bucket of powdered clay by the sink and sent it into the man's face with everything her fear could muster. The room erupted in white. He coughed, reeling, eyes blinking into blindness. The man in the vest lunged blindly where he thought she was. His shin met the steel edge of a stool with a crack that emptied his mouth of sound. Elena kicked the doorstop free. The heavy door swung on its spring and slammed, jolting the frame. She yanked the cupboard open, lifted Ethan in one motion, and ran. Sirens braided into the alarm. Police, fire, and a third pitch that vibrated in the teeth. An estate-grade security, klaxon. Kincaid's voice detonated in the hallway before his body appeared. "Elena! Art wing!" she shouted back, her voice not her own. He rounded the corner at a sprint, 2 agents at his flanks. All quiet competence fell away when he saw Ethan in her arms. Only motion remained. He shepherded them down the hall with a speed that did not jostle the boy. Behind, the kiln room door opened hard. Powder-white shapes stumbled out, coughing, furious. Kincaid didn't turn, his agents did. The click-snap of restraints broke like metronomes under the sirens. Outside, the yard was a mosaic of children in neat lines, teachers counting with faces washed in red light. Smoke boiled at the roofline from a canister propped in a stairwell, thick but not hot. The white van's driver saw security flood the yard and did not wait to be heroic. He slammed into gear and tore down the block. A black SUV slid from the opposite curb and pinned the van nose to nose with a thud that made bystanders cheer. Elena's legs shook only after she and Ethan were inside the back of Kincaid's car, with the doors closed, sound cut off as if by scissors. Ethan's face was spirographed with powder, eyes wide and lucid. "You threw clay at him," he said, wonder completely serious.
"I did," she breathed, laughing once because her body didn't know what else to do. Kincaid leaned in through the open front window. "You asked for the phrase," he said. "Good girl." "Don't call me girl," she managed, humor filament thin. "I teach multiplication." He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am."
Across town, Adrian's private line screamed to life in the middle of a boardroom stacked with glass, money, and the sort of quiet arrogance that pretends to be a virtue. He didn't apologize when he stood. He didn't explain. He just left, the room rearranging itself around the shockwave of his exit. He arrived at Westbrook to a thicket of cruisers and uniforms. He moved through it the way ships move through fog, by the certainty of maps no one else could see. Kincaid met him halfway, hands to his sides, eyes asking the question they both knew had only one right answer. "Where?" Adrian said. Kincaid
nodded toward the car. Adrian opened the rear door and the world telescoped to the space inside, his son, powder-dusted, alive and shaking.
Eleanor, hair half down, a slash of clay across her cheek like war paint, arm around the boy with a steadiness that kept the ground from tipping. Ethan made a sound Adrian had not heard since he was a toddler, something between a cry and a laugh, and launched himself across the seat. Adrian folded him in, pressed his face into his hair, closed his eyes against the heat behind them. He did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was scraped raw. "I'm here." Eleanor's hand, still on Ethan's back, did not move. She glanced past them to the school. Children were singing softly under a teacher's direction to keep them calm. A method she had taught, without ever naming it that. Adrian lifted his head and looked at her. Truly looked, the way a man looks, at a bridge, and finally understands what holds it up. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, simple as water, the first honest ones he'd given her. She nodded once, out of breath, out of argument. "Change your protocols," she said. "Fire alarms are candy to wolves." "They will be different by sundown," he answered. Kincaid rapped twice on the roof, a signal. "We've got one in custody," he reported through the window. The van driver ditched. The other 2? Not amateurs. The name Hale floated once. Could be bait. Could be a signature. Adrian's mouth became a line you could cut your finger on. "Bring me the truth," he said. "Not noise." Kincaid dipped his head and vanished into the machinery of the scene. Ethan shifted from his father to Elena and back again, small body indecisive. Finally, he wedged himself between them, shoulder against her, hand gripping Adrian's sleeve. He made them into a single structure without asking permission from either. Adrian saw it and did not correct him. The principal approached, breathless, eyes clear. "Everyone's safe," Ms. Patel said. "Your team was fast. Elena was faster." Adrian met Elena's eyes. Pride, that old iron mask, loosened its bolts. "I thought your presence was a coincidence," he said, low enough that only she heard. "An inconvenience? An angle I couldn't see?" I was wrong. Elena let the words hang until they became real. "I'm here because a child needed someone to read to him," she said. "That's all." "And because fate has a mean sense of humor," he said, not smiling. "Fate likes teachers," she said. "We show up even when the room is on fire." Sirens softened. The smoke thinned. The white van hissed where its radiator had surrendered. A news helicopter circled, hungry as a gull. Kincaid lifted a hand. A canvas screen unfurled between the sidewalk and the car like a curtain. It didn't shut the world out, but it made a space. Adrian took a breath that reached places he had forgotten air could travel. "You will have what you need to stay safe," he said. "And so will the school." "No announcements?" Eleanor replied immediately. "No donations with your name on them. No proof for the wolves." "Anonymous, then," he said. "Or invisible," she considered, then nodded. "Invisible works best." He looked at his son, then at her. There was a door inside him he had kept bolted so long the key had become a rumor. It shifted now, metal against metal, the noise soft and terrifying. "Stay," he said to Elena, and the word carried no command, only request. "Until he sleeps. After that, we will rewrite everything." She glanced at Ethan's face, at his, lashes dusted white like the first fall of winter. "I'll stay," she said. When the car door closed, the sound was soft, like a page turning. Outside, the shadows reapportioned themselves, thinner now, wary of a woman who knew how to ask the right question at the right time and throw a bucket of powder at the world when it came too close. Somewhere, a man with a blade-smooth smile read a text that said "failed" and poured himself another drink, convinced that the next move would be cleaner. Inside the car, a billionaire learned how to say "thank you" without bargaining. A boy fell, asleep with his hand on two different sleeves, and a teacher kept watch the way she always had. Quietly, without asking for anything, as if protection itself had been placed in her life by something that did not care for money or power, only for the fragile gravity of love. The estate was unusually silent after the attack. Security doubled, cameras upgraded, new guards posted at every gate. But inside the mansion, the hush wasn't about protection. It was about the unspoken tension between Adrian Vale and Elena Carter. For 2 nights, she had stayed until Ethan slept, reading by the firelight while Adrian paced the hall like a caged animal. Gratitude simmered in him, fierce and corrosive, but gratitude in his world was a debt, and debts were settled with wealth. On the 3rd evening, he finally acted. The study smelled of cedar and smoke, the fire crackling low. Elena sat in a leather chair with a book still open on her lap. Ethan had just fallen asleep upstairs. Her eyes were tired but steady as Adrian entered, carrying a folder so thin it seemed almost fragile in his hands. "Miss Carter," he began, his tone clipped, formal.
"I've been remiss," she closed the book. "How so?" "I haven't compensated you." He set the folder on the desk, sliding it toward her with the precision of a contract. "Inside is a financial package, a trust fund in your name.
"It will cover rent, expenses, and provide you freedom from—" His eyes flicked toward the book in her lap, toward the threadbare coat hanging on the chair. "Unnecessary burdens." Elena blinked once, slowly. You're offering me money. I'm offering you independence, he corrected. You risked your life twice for my son. That debt cannot remain unpaid. Her lips parted, then curved, not into a smile, but into something that carried both sorrow and defiance. She rose, walking to the desk. Her fingers brushed the folder but did not open it. Mr. Vale, she said softly, what you call a debt, I call humanity. Adrian's jaw tightened. Humanity doesn't pay rent. Humanity doesn't erase the whispers chasing you at your
school. Humanity doesn't keep you safe when men like Marcus Hale decide your leverage. Her hand fell away from the folder. Then I'll face those things without your money. The fire popped, casting a shard of light across his face.
You're proud, he said. You're wrong, she answered evenly. I'm not proud, I'm free, and freedom isn't something you can buy. The words landed like stones, dropped into still water, rippling through the room. Adrian's breath slowed, his eyes narrowing. He was used to negotiations, to people, bending around him like reeds before the wind, but Elena did not bend. You live in a crumbling apartment, he pressed, his voice harder now. You hide overdue bills in drawers, you go without meals to grade papers for children whose parents question your worth. And still you refuse? Yes, she said, her voice unshaken. Because if I take your money, then everything they whisper about me becomes true. That I saved your son for profit, that I stayed for gain, that integrity has a price. I won't let your world strip that from me. For the first time, Adrian's control cracked. His fist struck the desk, rattling the folder. Then tell me what you want, he demanded. There must be something. Her answer came like breath, steady and disarming. I want Ethan to sleep through the night without fear. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Adrian turned away, pacing toward the window. The city lights sprawled beneath him, but he saw nothing. He pressed a hand against the glass, as if trying to steady himself against a world he could not bend. You confuse me, he muttered, almost to himself. Elena stepped closer, her voice softer now. No, I unsettle you, because I'm not asking for anything you can give with a signature. I'm not for sale, Mr. Vale. He turned, his eyes catching the firelight, grey steel glinting like flint about to spark. Everyone is for sale. Then you've never met someone who isn't, she replied. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the space. The billionaire bound by pride, the teacher bound by integrity. Finally, Adrian picked up the folder, tore it once, and dropped it into the flames. The paper curled, blackened, disintegrated into sparks that climbed the chimney. He didn't look at her as he did it. I don't know what to do with you, he admitted. Elena exhaled.
Slowly. You don't have to do anything. Just let me keep being who I am. The fire roared louder, as though punctuating her words. Adrian sank into the chair opposite her, shoulders heavy, the weight of decades pressing down. When I was a boy, he said quietly, my father told me kindness was a weakness.
That gratitude was a leash. I built an empire on that lesson. And yet here you are, ripping it apart. Elena lowered herself back into her chair. Maybe it's time you unlearned it. They sat in silence, the fire between them, two worlds, colliding again, not with violence this time, but with something quieter, more dangerous. At last, Adrian spoke, his voice stripped bare. I cannot thank you, not in the way men like me are built, but understand this. My son's life is my life, and you've given it back to me twice. Her eyes softened, though her spine remained straight. "Then don't thank me. Just be the father he needs." The words hit harder than any refusal. Adrian leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, the pride in him wrestling with the gratitude he could not voice. When he opened them again, Elena was watching him, not as a billionaire, not as a man to fear or admire, but as someone who carried his own wounds. For the first time in years, Adrian Vale felt truly seen, and it unsettled him more than any enemy ever had. Weeks do not announce themselves when they are healing you. They pass like soft weather, quietly, steadily, until one morning the light in a room looks different, and you realize the night must have been gentler than the last. At the Vale estate, the nights grew kind. Ethan stopped waking in screams. He still stirred, still reached out, but his hand no longer clawed at shadows. It searched for a voice. And when the voice came, whether Elena's or, increasingly, Adrian's halting whisper, he settled the way a tide settles against shore. Breakfast changed too. On a Tuesday that smelled of maple and coffee, Ethan pushed a stack of pancakes away, jaw set in a child's geography of stubbornness. "Brave bite," Eleanor said, sitting beside him. She tore off a small piece, dipped it in syrup, and touched it to her tongue with exaggerated seriousness. "See? Brave," Ethan mimicked her, laughing around the bite he pretended to fear. Across the table, Adrian watched. "Brave bite," he repeated under his breath, as if filing a new term next to leverage and liquidity. The word looked strange in his mouth, then easier. He reached for a piece himself. "For research," he said dryly. Ethan giggled. Elena didn't look to see if Adrian smiled. She felt it from across the table, the air movement of a wall shifting by a brick. At Westbrook Primary, something else shifted. There were new crossing guards at both ends of the block, same uniforms as before, but the training was different. Eyes up, radios on, a choreography that did not trip. The fire doors received new hydraulic closers that swung shut faster. The school's old cameras quietly became better cameras. Ms. Patel didn't announce donors. A check arrived at the district. Office from an art foundation no one had heard of. The account number had no story to tell. A safety consultant visited the staff lounge and spoke in plain words about exits and head counts, about drills that prepared without frightening. Elena said nothing. She simply taught under the new lights, grateful for a hallway that listened. Better, parents noticed. The harshest whispers softened first to caution, then to curiosity. One morning, a mother who had once cut her with perfume and smile pressed a note into Elena's hand. "Thank you for the way you talked to my son about anger." He came home breathing like a lighthouse. No signature. It didn't need one. The children, who needed no signatures for anything, made a different kind of announcement. They presented Elena with a construction paper book, Miss Carter's Words That Fix Things. Each page was a phrase they'd heard and kept. Try again is a kind of brave. We don't break, we bend and come back. Count to 5 like you're blowing out a birthday cake. When she flipped to the last page, Ethan's drawing waited there. A stick figure with a book, bigger than its body, and a boy beside it, holding
"A star for your pocket," he said, shy and proud, "in case the day is hard."
"It will work," she said, sure as a spell. Trust arrived in small transactions that were not transactions at all. Adrian began staying in the room when she read, not standing in the doorway as a sentry, but in a chair close enough for his
knee to brush the table. The The first night he read a paragraph aloud, the sentence broke twice on the shore of his throat.
He coughed, pretended to adjust the lamp, tried again. "Slower," Eleanor said softly. "Let him float on it." He slowed. Ethan's head sank onto the pillow, the story lifted like breath. Afterward, Adrian stared at the closed book as if it had taught him a math problem he couldn't outwork. "I close deals with fewer variables than bedtime," he muttered. "Their currency is different," she said. "Time, attention, safety, sometimes pancakes." "Brave bites," he corrected, without looking up. They both knew he had remembered. He started asking questions at inconvenient hours. At 11 p.m., if he refuses to leave the car after
"School, what do I do?" At 7 a.m. He says he hates music class. He loved it last month.
At 3 in the afternoon, mid-meeting, a single text, he cried when I left for the office. "I left anyway. Was that wrong?" Elena answered each like a message in a bottle. Give him a choice that keeps the schedule, door or hand. Hate is loud for fear. Ask what part scares him. Leaving isn't wrong. Not telling him you'll be back is. Name the hour. Keep it. He kept it. When he missed it by 15 minutes one night, he told Ethan exactly how late and exactly why. He watched the boy consider the numbers the way he considered blocks on a tall tower. The tower wobbled.
"It didn't fall." "Thank you," Adrian said to Elena the next day, without looking away from his son, building a ruin into a palace on the carpet. The words no longer scraped. He wore them like shoes that had started to fit. They walked the garden.
Sometimes, the three of them, in the blue hour before dinner when the sky looks like it has forgotten how to choose a color, Elena showed Ethan how to build a boat from a page torn cleanly from a magazine. They sailed them in the long fountain that ran the length of the courtyard, tiny vessels traveling between stone lions who never blinked. "My mother used to do this," Elena said, placing a second boat beside Ethan's. "She called them wishes that know how to swim." Ethan launched both with a solemn push. "What do you wish, Miss Carter? For you to sleep and wake and spend a day forgetting? You ever had a reason to be afraid?" "What do you wish, Papa?" Ethan asked. Adrian's answer could have been 100 things. He chose the smallest and hardest. To tell the truth faster, Eleanor looked at him then, not like a teacher checking a paper, but like a friend hearing a secret. In the hedgerows beyond the fountain, Kincaid kept his shadows at a courteous distance. He had learned that trust also meant stepping back. The past did not vanish because the present was kind. Marcus Hale's name slid through a report once, briefly, then went quiet in a way that was not peace but coiling. Adrian's businesses stopped bleeding, the board meetings lowered their teeth. The envelope of letters cut from magazines did not reappear, though Kincaid insisted on running each staff member through a sieve of background checks that would shame a customs office. Elena accepted the security badge Adrian offered, not a key to the mansion, but a card that worked for the school's back entrance and a panic button that paired to Kincaid's phone. She wore it behind her ID where students couldn't see it. When Adrian handed it over, he said, "It means you get to make a call without asking me first." "Trust," she translated. "Liability," he said automatically. "Trust," she repeated, and his mouth bent into roux before it straightened. At the school, Ms. Patel ran a Saturday reading clinic and insisted Elena take the stipend the district offered. "It's from a grant," she said. "Anonymous." She did not glance at the ceiling when she said it. She did not need to. Elena accepted the check because it paid for groceries and because it was not money with a name attached to it. She Bought paperbacks with bright covers and a pair of shoes that didn't tell the pavement exactly where she had stepped all day. The landlord's notice remained on her fridge, a magnet pinning a threat. She called him, arranged installments, and did not mention the billionaire. He didn't mention the headlines. He simply said, "You've never missed twice," and she said, "I won't start now." One night, Ethan fell asleep halfway through a chapter of Charlotte's Web. Elena tucked the blanket to his chin. Adrian stood at the foot of the bed, hands in his pockets, looking like a man at a shoreline, unsure of how cold the water would be. "He asked me today if people can be broken," he said softly. "What did you say?" "That's some break and some bend," he said. Then, after a beat, "I didn't tell him I broke once." "You can tell him later," she said, "when the story knows how to hold it." In the hallway, he stopped and turned. "Do you believe
In fate? It sounded like a trap the way he asked it, but the spring had been removed. "I believe in choices that look like fate afterward," she said.
and in people who show up?" He nodded as if she had given him coordinates. "I went to the school today," he admitted, almost sheepish. "A walk-through with Ms. Patel, back entrance, no cameras. I signed a wall the students had painted. Under a stairwell, they wrote their names in rainbows." "What did you write?" she asked. "Mine?" He looked away, embarrassed at the poverty of the answer. "Next time I'll write something better. Next time you'll bring Ethan," she said. "He has a rainbow name." He laughed, low and surprised. "He does." They began a ritual of 3 truths at dinner. Not gratitude, Adrian was still allergic to the word, but truths, because truths could be verified like balance sheets. "Ethan, I ran the fastest at recess." "Elena, I told the principal no 3 times and didn't apologize afterward." "Adrian, after long thought, I left a meeting to go outside and breathe because I wanted to shout." "Did it work?" Elena asked. He nodded. "The breathing or the not shouting?" "Both." He considered. "Yes." Ethan reached across the table and placed his small hand over his father's. "Brave bite," he said, solemn as a priest. Adrian closed his fingers carefully around the boys. "Brave bite," he agreed. The first time Adrian offered to drive Elena home, he phrased it like logistics. "It's late. The driver can—" "I like the bus," she said, smiling. "It reminds me I live in a city with other people." He didn't argue. The next night, the bus stop had a new streetlight. No plaque, bright, steady, indifferent to gratitude. He walked her to the door anyway. The night was cool. The city wore its jewelry quietly, taillights, windows, a neon sign that blinked as if it had a stutter. "You were right," he said, hands in his coat pockets. "Not everything has a price." "Some things have a cost," she said. "The difference matters." He tilted his head. "The cost. Time, attention, listening, apologizing without but." He took the list like a man takes a prescription, curious, wary, a bit relieved to have something to do. "Teach me," he said finally, the words simple and unsheathed. "I am," she said, nodding toward the bus bench where a teenager slept with a backpack for a pillow and a book clutched like a shield. And so is the world. They stood in the quiet for a breath longer than strangers would allow. He didn't reach. For her, she didn't step closer. Trust was not a touch yet. It was air left in the space and the knowledge that neither would use it to run. "Good night, Adrian," she said. "Good night, Eleanor," he answered, and found that he liked the sound of both names when nothing else was attached. Walls remember the first crack. They remember the second and the third. One evening near midnight, Adrian stood in the study and looked at the portrait of Livia. The pearls, the captured laugh. He did something he had not done since the night it was hung. He spoke to it. "I don't know how to do this," he said, "but he's sleeping, and I'm trying." He did not expect an answer. He expected the old cold. Instead, he felt the small warmth of a lamp left on in a room you thought would be dark. Downstairs, Eleanor paused in the library doorway, listening to the house breathe. She could feel the weight of it differently now, not as a fortress, not as a museum, but as a place learning how to be a home again. Ethan whispered in his sleep, the kind of whisper that is not words, but a proof of safety. She smiled, pulled the blanket higher, and switched off the lamp. Trust did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like this. A boy sleeping, a man unlearning, a woman staying until the light could hold its own. Spring arrived quietly, draping the city in soft greens and blossoms that leaned into the wind like children at play. The Vale estate, once a fortress of marble and silence, hummed differently now. Laughter threaded through the halls, books gathered in corners, and music, Ethan's piano scales, halting but proud, spilled into rooms that had known only echo. Elena Carter had not planned this. She had stepped into the life of a frightened boy, expecting to soothe him for a few nights, maybe a few weeks. Yet she had stayed long enough to see walls crack, hearts unbend, and a billionaire learn how to breathe without armor. On a warm afternoon, she stood in the garden with Ethan at her side. The boy's hair caught the sun as he showed her his fleet. Paper boats lined at the edge of the fountain, ready to sail. "Wishes that swim," he said, repeating her words with a smile that was no longer shadowed by fear. "Yes," she whispered. "And look how strong your wishes are now." He launched the first boat. It glided steady across the water, its folded edges sharp with confidence. Behind them, Adrian watched. He had been watching more often, quietly, not as a man assessing an investment, but as someone learning to cherish without asking what it cost. "Miss Carter," he said, stepping forward, though his voice carried less formality than before. She turned. Adrian. The use of his first name startled him still. But it no longer cut like a trespass. It settled like truth. "I've been considering something," he said, his tone deliberate. "My entire life I've measured gratitude. In ledgers, a gift, a favor, a debt repaid. You've refused all of it."
"And still, I owe you everything." Elena shook her head. "You owe me nothing." His gaze softened. "That's where you're wrong. You saved Ethan twice, yes. But what you've given me is far greater. You reminded me that not everything
is measured, that some things simply are. He paused, as if the words themselves were fragile. "You've saved my heart, Eleanor. I didn't think it had anything left to rescue." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full of breath, of warmth, of the kind of truth that doesn't need more words. Ethan broke it first, tugging Elena's sleeve. "Papa doesn't know how to make boats," he announced, earnest as a verdict. Adrian arched a brow. "Is that so?" Elena crouched beside Ethan. "Then we'll teach him." She handed Adrian a sheet of paper from the stack. "Fold here." His hands, so sure in boardrooms and contracts, fumbled on the crease. Ethan giggled, guiding him with small fingers. Adrian followed, awkward but willing. When the boat was finished, lopsided but seaworthy, he placed it in the fountain. It wobbled, then caught the current, sailing beside Ethan's with stubborn determination. Ethan clapped. "See, Papa's wish floats too." Adrian looked at Eleanor, and for once, pride wasn't in his eyes, gratitude was. That evening, the three of them gathered in the library. The fire burned low. The shelves lined with books Elena had begun to rearrange into patterns only she understood. Ethan fell asleep early, his head pillowed against her arm, a smile ghosting across his face. Adrian watched from the opposite chair, his glass untouched. For a long time he said nothing. Then quietly, "Stay." Eleanor glanced down at Ethan. "Until he wakes?" "No," Adrian said. His voice faltered, then steadied. "In our lives. Stay." Her breath caught. She searched his face, looking for the contract hidden behind the words, the condition waiting like a trap. But there was none. For the first time, his offer wasn't wrapped in power. It was stripped bare, human. "You don't need me," she said softly. "On the contrary," he replied. "For years I thought strength meant needing no one. But you've shown me that real strength is knowing who you can't lose." The words hung between them, fragile as spun glass, but strong enough. "To hold?" She looked down at Ethan, then back at Adrian. "I'll stay. But not because of gratitude, because of love, the kind you don't pay for, the kind you earn." For a moment, Adrian's eyes closed, as if the word love itself was a balm on old scars. When he opened them again, the man who once believed only in power looked younger, lighter, almost free. Weeks later, Westbrook Primary hosted its spring concert. Children crowded the stage in paper crowns and cardboard wings, singing off-key with joy that shook the walls. Parents laughed and clapped, cameras flashing like fireflies. Elena sat in the front row. Ethan stood among the children, his voice small but clear, his eyes searching the crowd until they found hers. He smiled, not afraid, not hiding. Beside her, Adrian sat stiffly in a chair too small for his stature, but his hand brushed hers, not as a transaction, not as an offer, but as a quiet tether. When the children sang their final note, he applauded with genuine abandon, his face alight with pride, not for himself, but for his son. Elena glanced at him, and he leaned close enough for only her to hear. "This is what gratitude looks like." She smiled, tears stinging her eyes. "No, this is what family looks like." The world outside still whispered. Rumors did not vanish overnight, but they mattered less now. Parents who once doubted Elena now saw their children flourish under her care. Board members who once scoffed at Adrian's weakness found his decisions sharper, steadier, and though enemies still lurked in shadows, they found fewer cracks to slip through. For inside the mansion, inside the school, inside the small, steady orbit of three lives bound together, there was something stronger than fear, stronger than money, stronger even than pride. There was trust, and trust, Elena Carter had taught them, was the greatest gift of all. On a quiet Sunday morning, Elena stood at her apartment window for the last time. The landlord had finally sold the building. Her bags were packed. She looked around the small space, the cracked walls, the flickering bulb, the table where she had graded papers late into the night. It had been her cage and her refuge. But she no longer needed it. When she arrived at the Vale estate later that day, Ethan raced into her arms. "You're here forever now," he said, certain as sunrise. Adrian stood behind him, his expression unreadable at first. Then slowly he smiled, a rare, unguarded smile that reached his eyes. "Yes," he said, "she is." Elena set her bags down and stepped into the home that was no longer just his, no longer just hers, but theirs. A mansion transformed not by wealth, but by love. That night, as the fire glowed low and Ethan slept upstairs, Adrian poured a single glass of wine and raised it, not to power, not to deals, not to victories. "To you," he said quietly. Elena shook her head. "Not to me, to us." He hesitated, then nodded. "To us." And for the first time in his life, Adrian Vale felt gratitude that could not be measured, repaid, or erased. It was not a debt. It was a gift, the gift of love, the gift of trust, the gift of family, the gift of gratitude.